The snow fell endlessly, a curtain of silence draping itself over the prairie until land and sky were indistinguishable. Morgan Hale urged his horse through the drifts, though both beast and rider were near exhaustion. He was 30 years old, yet solitude had aged him more than the years ever could. His eyes were steady but hollow, his jaw rough with neglect, his heart weighed down by memories of failures he never confessed aloud. The cold pressed into his bones, and for a long time he thought himself the last soul alive in this white world. It was then he heard the sound. At first, he mistook it for the cry of the wind, but the longer he listened the less it resembled wind. It was thinner, sharper, carrying the edge of need. He pulled on the reins, horse snorting in the stillness, and tilted his head. The sound came again, children. His chest tightened. It had been years since he had heard such a thing, yet he could not mistake the pitch of hunger in their voices. Against reason, he dismounted, boots crunching into snow, and followed the sound. Small footprints appeared, shallow impressions already filling with flakes. They were too delicate for a man, too erratic for a woman. Children's tracks. Morgan followed them into a sparse stand of aspens, until the outline of a cabin appeared, leaning crooked against the storm. Smoke whispered from the chimney, thin as thread. He stepped closer, raised a hand, and knocked. The door opened slowly, and he saw her. She stood framed by the fire's dim glow, a young woman whose face carried the fatigue of sleepless nights and silent suffering. Her hair hung loose, dark as raven's wings, her eyes wide and fierce even in weakness. Two little girls clung to her skirts, their cheeks hollow, their lips cracked, their tiny shoulders trembling beneath blankets too thin for the season. Their cries were the ones he had followed. "They have not eaten in 2 days," the woman said. Her voice was low, stripped of pleading, heavy with truth. She did not introduce herself. She did not bow. She offered a fact, daring him to walk away. Morgan's throat worked. He had little left himself. His hand drifted to the inside of his coat where the last strip of jerky lay hard and dry. One piece. Enough to keep him riding through the storm. Yet the sight of the girls undid his hesitation. Slowly, he drew it out, snapped it in two, and pressed it into their small hands. They chewed slowly, reverently, as though tasting more than food, tasting hope. The woman's eyes softened by a fraction. "Atzilla," she said finally, voice quiet as falling ash. "Morgan," he replied. The silence stretched, filled only by the brittle pop of the dying fire. He crouched beside it, stirring the embers, coaxing flame with breath and patience until the light grew. Atzilla watched him carefully, measuring each movement, as if unsure whether mercy was truth or disguise. He felt the gulf between them, she, Apache, carrying the weight of a people despised by the nearby town. He, a cowboy with a sullied name, known for drifting and running when others stood firm. Two worlds with no bridge but necessity. The storm made departure impossible. Morgan remained. He chopped wood until his shoulders burned. Atzilla sewed the torn seam of his glove, leaving it near his place without a word. He set snares in the woods, she brewed pine needle tea, bitter yet warming. Their bond grew not in speech but in gestures. Her daughters, Eileen and Tyanita, began to whisper, to giggle faintly when shaping tiny snow figures outside the door. Once, Morgan caught himself smiling at their play, though he quickly lowered his gaze, hiding it beneath the brim of his hat. Nights were long. While Atzilla and the children slept, Morgan sat awake by the fire, haunted by ghosts. He remembered a winter long ago when he had passed a starving family on the trail and ridden on, fear of scarcity louder than compassion. He had told himself then it was survival, but the memory festered like a wound. The hollow faces of that family never left him. Now, in Atzilla's cabin, the past pressed hard. He could not fail again. When food ran thin, he rose before dawn, fastening his rifle. Atzilla stirred. "Where are you going?" she asked, suspicion shadowing her tone. "Hunting," he said simply. She studied him, then nodded, though doubt lingered in her gaze. The snow fought him step for step. Drifts swallowed his legs, the wind cut his face raw, but he pressed on, driven by the memory of the girl's hollow eyes. Hours passed. At last he found a clearing, where a deer stood trembling, nose pressed to the snow in search of buried grass. Morgan raised his rifle, breath misting in the cold, heart heavy. He whispered an apology, squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked through the forest like a vow. The deer fell, silent in death. Morgan dragged it back, muscles burning, every step an act of will. When Atzilla opened the door to see him staggering with the burden, her eyes widened. The daughters rushed to the threshold, clapping with joy. Together, Morgan and Atzilla dressed the deer, hands working in rhythm. That night, the cabin filled with the rich scent of roasting meat. Island and Tyanita ate until their faces flushed, laughter ringing light and free, their hunger quieted. Atzela moved past Morgan, brushing his wrist as she handed him a strip of venison. The touch was brief, almost accidental, yet it lingered like warmth spreading through frost. She did not speak thanks, and he did not ask for it. The silence between them had changed. It no longer carried suspicion, but something softer, tentative, fragile as the first blade of green through snow. But storms did not end with snow. Morgan knew the town nearby would never forgive what they would call betrayal, helping an Apache woman, sheltering with her. He imagined the whispers, Hale's gone weak. Hale's turned savage. They had judged him harshly before, this would be worse. Shame used to drive him from place to place, but as he watched Atzela's daughters fall asleep with full bellies, curled against each other, he wondered if belonging to people's scorn mattered less than belonging to mercy. When the storm cleared, the land shone hard and brilliant under the sun. Morgan saddled his horse, every movement weighted with decision. Atzela stood in the doorway, daughters clutching her skirts. Her gaze held both worry and something unspoken, fragile as breath. He felt it stir inside him, a longing not for romance declared, but for trust earned day by day. "I'll ride into town," he said. His voice was calm, but inside he braced against the ridicule that awaited. "You will return?" Atzela asked softly. He paused, meeting her eyes. "If you'll have me." The words hung between them, simple yet heavier than any vow. She gave no answer, but her silence carried its own truth. The girls waved, small hands bright against the white glare of snow. Morgan tipped his hat, turned his horse toward the horizon. The road would be long, the judgment of men cruel, but for the first time in years, he felt steady. He had chosen not to turn away. He had chosen to stay when it mattered. The narrator's voice rose not from the prairie, but from some older place, as though spoken to every soul who had ever felt alone. In the winters of our lives, it is not grand gestures that save us, but mercies small and quiet. A piece of bread shared when hunger gnaws. A fire built for strangers in the storm. A hand that lingers long enough to remind us we are not forsaken. Dignity is born in giving, and love in acts so small they nearly pass unseen. And perhaps, when our own snows fall heavy, we will remember this. In the storm, it is enough to stay.